Thank you for visiting the YouTube channel for bestbiblecommentaries.com. In this video, I'd like to show you the 1st and 2nd Thessalonians volume in the IVP New Testament Commentary series. Before I do, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to this channel to see videos on Bible commentaries, study Bibles, and other resources that help people understand God's Word. New Testament scholar G.K. Beale is the author of the 1st and 2nd Thessalonians volume in the IVP New Testament Commentary series. This volume was published in 2003. It is 279 pages in length. G.K. Beale, if you're not familiar with him, is a professor at Wheaton College Graduate School. He is conservative, evangelical, and reformed. He is best known for his commentary on Revelation in the NIGTC series. So if you're familiar with that Revelation volume, then you already have some insight into Beale's eschatology, which is one of the dominant themes of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and I'll talk about that more in just a moment. The IVP New Testament Commentary series, if you're not familiar with it, I would say is comparable to the NIVAC series, or the NIV Application Commentary series. There is introductory to intermediate level exegesis combined with a lot of application. One difference between the two volumes is that in the NIVAC volumes, the application section is mostly relegated to the third part of every commentary section, the contemporary significance section. The three parts of the NIV sections are the one is the original meaning, the second is bridging context, and the third is contemporary significance. So, but in this particular series and in this volume, the application is spread throughout the exegesis, and it's not just found in one part of a particular section. So that's one of the main differences, but there are a lot of application illustrations and suggestions found in this particular series, making these volumes worthy of your consideration if you're looking for commentaries for a ministry context. It's just some of the illustrations that I've come across in using this particular volume. G.K. Beale in one passage talks about Jehovah's Witnesses and their theology. He talks about some of the weaknesses he sees in today's seminary education. He talks about homosexuality in the modern day and how that relates to a particular passage in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. In one very memorable passage, he illustrates Paul's point by talking about the death of his own father. There's actually a couple times in this commentary where Beale's application suggestions are illustrated with stories from his own life. And it's done very well. He is very good. I will say this, that the Revelation in the NIGTC series demonstrates his biblical scholarship, and this volume does too. But taking both volumes together, it shows the breadth of skill that G.K. Beale has, where he can write a technical commentary of 1,200 pages on the book of Revelation, and then he can write a mid-level commentary, a mid-level commentary that has a focus on application and excel at both. That's extraordinary. It's usually writers and commentators cannot do both of those things simultaneously, but Beale does. This is mid-level, and so, as I said, the Greek is transliterated. A person does not need to know Greek to maximize this particular volume. Let me give you an example of what the layout is like. This is 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 1 through 8. Every passage the title is in bold. There's an introductory section to this particular passage that's maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs in length, about 2/3 of a page. And then there is verse-by-verse commentary. And in this case, chapter 4, verses 1 and 2 is discussed in about a page and a half. Chapter 4, verses 3 through 8 is discussed in about 8 or 9 pages, and then chapter 4, verses 9 through 12 is discussed in about a page. So this is generally the layout. There's an introduction to each passage and then a verse by verse commentary, but Beale approaches the verse by verse commentary a passage at a time. I will also note that the section headings are written for the purposes of application, and I think that would be especially helpful to those using this book in a ministry setting. So, for example, Beale titles chapter 4, verses 1 through 8, "Do not reject God and incur his judgment, but desire to please him." And then chapter 4, verses 1 through 2 is titled, "The Goal of Pleasing God by Obeying his Commands." And then 3 through 8, "Avoid immorality and pursue holiness." So if you're a preacher or teacher, you might want to adapt those headings for your purposes, but they're kind of application ready is how I would describe them. Sometimes commentators outline the text in a way that's purely exegetical, and they're not really close to application outlines, but in this particular volume, they are application outlines, and so I think that would be helpful to a lot of readers. How about reviews for this particular volume? A couple of, looks like I have 3 reviews to note today. The first is from the Expository Times. "The book's main strength, and those finding it most helpful, will be readers seeking a coherent response to the dispensational eschatology of the Left Behind series." So that's an interesting review. First, it gives away Beale's eschatology, so he is amillennial, so that's a person who is choosing a commentary on First and Second Thessalonians would probably want to consider the eschatology of the writer, and Beale is amillennial, as users of his Revelation volume know. I think the review, when it says seeking a coherent response to the dispensational eschatology of the Left Behind series, first I would say there's a lot more value in this commentary than that. And second, not all dispensational theologians love the Left Behind series. So I'll just say that. So interesting review, but nevertheless, his point comes across with regard to Beale's eschatology. He says it's comparable to Michael Holmes' First and Second Thessalonians volume in the NIVAC series, and I would agree with that. If a person in a ministry context had this volume by Beale and the Michael Holmes volume in the NIVAC series, you would have so many application helps and illustrations for your purposes. The reviewer does say that he thinks that Beale is better at interpreting the difficult texts, but he says Holmes is better at how much application he offers the reader. So that was his take. That was the Expository Times. Just a couple others quickly. The JETS, the Journal for the Evangelical Theological Society. The review said, "Both pastors and scholars should have this commentary. I recommend this commentary as a must," is the JET's conclusion. One more, the Evangelical Quarterly. "This book will surely be useful to preachers and teachers and preachers and study group leaders. It is attentive to the text throughout and to the text's potential for spiritual and pastoral application." I will add at this point, should a person who doesn't share Beale's eschatology still consider this commentary? I would say absolutely. The application help and the exegetical insight in most you would still find that helpful in the majority of the commentary. You're not going to follow, a person who's not amillennial is not going to follow Beale's interpretation on First and Second or First Thessalonians 4, for instance. But it's still going to be helpful. So a couple of examples, just regarding the eschatology. I already said that, but First Thessalonians 4:13-18, 1 Thessalonians 5:11, Beale says those both refer to the second coming of Christ. Authorship, Beale is an evangelical conservative, and along those lines, or consistent with those lines, he defends Pauline authorship of the epistles. Some evangelicals might disagree with that, but generally that's the conservative position. A couple of illustration examples, just so you can get a taste of that, get an example of that. The first one comes from 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 13. And he's writing about his father-in-law. Beale's writing about his father-in-law. He says, an example from the human realm illustrates what Paul has in mind. My father-in-law had an illness that caused him to lose his ability to speak. We could still converse with him and ask him questions, but his wife had to answer. When she gave an answer, he would give a thumbs up if her answer represented his thoughts, or a thumbs down if he thought differently. Usually he gave a thumbs up because his wife had lived so many years with him that she knew his thoughts about life. It is the same with one's relationship with the Lord. He typically does not speak audibly to us, but if we live in His presence, in His Word, we will begin to think His thoughts after Him. We will increasingly do what He wants and be better able to represent His mind before the world. This is the transforming notion that Paul has in mind at the end of chapter 2, verse 13. So that's a good illustration from Beale using his father-in-law to explain Paul's point. And it's a good illustration. It's a good example of just in the middle of the exegesis, he gives this application. It's not relegated to a different section of the commentary. The other example illustration is just on the other page here, and it's illustrating 1 Thessalonians 2, verse 14. Beale writes, like Paul, all Christians should give thanks for trials. Corrie ten Boom relates in The Hiding Place an incident that taught her to be thankful continually. When she and her sister Betsy were taken to a horribly inhumane German prison camp named Ravensbrück, they had to live in flea-infested and overcrowded barracks. The morning they arrived, they read together 1 Thessalonians 5, 16 through 18. Be joyful always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances. Afterward, Betsy told Corrie to thank God for every aspect of their new lodgings. Corrie initially would not thank God for the fleas, but her sister persisted and Corrie finally gave in. As the ensuing months passed, they were surprised to discover how freely they could conduct Bible studies and prayer meetings without the guards interfering. Later, they found out that they could do so many things openly because the guards would not come into the barracks for fear of becoming infested with fleas. So, interesting illustration from The Hiding Place. I hope this video has been helpful to you in understanding more about this 1 and 2 Thessalonians commentary by G.K. Beale. Thank you so much for watching it, and thank you for visiting bestbiblecommentaries.com.